Hey guys, this is Kathy Newton coming at you from Therapy Rocks, spelled R-O-X on the end. This channel is all about understanding, managing, and healing complex PTSD and learning how to play again. So today we're going to be talking about the different languages of trauma. In previous videos, I've talked about a phase-oriented approach to trauma and how important it is to have some structure to your healing and your recovery so you don't get lost in it. And this concept goes along with that one in terms of developing a language to talk about your symptoms. Number one, the language helps you understand your symptoms, but also you can also educate other people about your symptoms, including your support people and your therapist, if you have a language to talk about your symptoms. So there are several languages out there, or you might want to come up with your own. A language that makes sense to you, words that make sense to you, phrases that make sense to you, metaphors that make sense to you. So I'm just going to share with you the most common ones, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the languages I use, because I kind of intersperse several languages together. And then as you watch my videos, you're going to see the metaphors that I use commonly that I think have power. And as you watch other people, other creators that talk about childhood PTSD, you're going to find some metaphors that they use. Feel free to borrow them if they help you. This is not information that we want to own or keep to ourselves. It's information we want to share. Every trauma survivor out there is just trying to heal and get better. And we need to help each other and share what we know and the powerful metaphors and things and language that we use that we think might be helpful to someone else. Okay? So I'm going to talk about languages, and then I might, if I get a chance, talk about a few of the metaphors I typically use, if I can remember them. So basically, I think maybe one of the earliest languages that came about when people started really paying attention to trauma was ego state therapy. And so the concept of ego state therapy, and I should know who started ego state therapy, and I don't, and that is very sad. So I will try to post that in the link. Ego state therapy is one that I really like, and I used for the book that I wrote. I really used ego state therapy because I thought it was maybe the simplest to understand. And it's basically looking at a split between the adult part, or the most grown-up part, or the most spiritual part, depending on how you want to look at it, and the emotional parts under the surface, maybe a child part, sometimes a teenage part, angry part, and the concept of being attached to the perpetrator. So basically, the language, you may notice yourself walking through your daily life, and you're at work and you're feeling very grown up and you're doing what you have to do, and that task-oriented part of your brain is online, and you're doing everything you need to do, and then you walk up and maybe there's some coworkers in the lunchroom and they're whispering. So that's a common trigger, right, for a trauma survivor, because they're already walking around in survival mode, and so they notice everything, and the average person might not even notice. So they automatically start to think, they go to that child place where they feel like they're not good enough. Someone's talking about me, I did something wrong. Now they're not going to like me. And they go all bad on themselves. And so there's an immediate spontaneous age regression. And Charles Whitfield talks about spontaneous age regression in his book called Memory and Abuse. Wonderful book. Again, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites. It talks about the concept of that feeling of going from being a healthy grown-up to just within a nanosecond you feel like you're 2 years old. Most of the time with complex PTSD, what I see happen with folks is if they get triggered into that child part, then quickly on the heels of that, this adolescent part will show up. And I fondly call it the kick-ass part. And I have one. So I fondly call it that. And that is protector part. And you see I'm using different languages already. So try to stick with this ego state therapy, ego state concept. So basically you've got child parts, you've got adult parts in that language. And that's pretty simple to understand and use. The one that I think is pretty close to that, oh, wait a minute, I wanted to show you something from Janina Fisher's chart that she created, and I thought it was good. And it uses ego state therapy to explain couple dynamics, and maybe this will kind of help demonstrate what I'm trying to say about ego states. So she has a chart here that says couple dynamics. We bring our young selves to the relationship. And she shows two wise adult parts. And then under that, she shows a child part and a teen part, and then a child part and a teen part for the other wise adult. And then she talks here about how this person's child part might get activated or triggered, and then the teen part shows up. And then how this person's child part might get activated or triggered, and then their teenage part shows up. And then unfortunately what happens is at that point there's no wise adult in the room. So that's pretty easy to understand, and I use that a lot with couples, because the only time we get into trouble as in our couple relationships is when we're not staying big. And of course it's going to happen. But we have to learn to manage that activation and that getting little and going into those parts. So that is one language. The next language that I really like is the language of structural dissociation. Who will show up? This was formulated by Vanderhart, Nijenhuis, and Steele, and I just crucified the middle name. It's spelled Nijenhuis, and Kathy Steele. So Ono Vanderhart, the middle name that I'm not going to try to crucify again, and Kathy Steele developed this concept of structural dissociation. And basically what it means is, I'll show you this chart. I'm going to talk about this first. There's a split here, okay, when trauma happens. Okay, it splits these two parts that were once functioning together. So the first part that's going on with normal life part of the self, and then there's the traumatized child self or selves. So basically it talks about that when trauma happens, those parts are forced to split. And out of the traumatized child selves, we get several different action systems or parts. Fight, flight, freeze. You can see that. Fight, flight, freeze, submit, or attach part, needy part. And each one of these parts have different characteristics. And what happens is, a trauma survivor can have all these parts, but normally there's a default part. Some people might always go to fight first. Some people might always go to flight first. And we talked about that a little bit before. But these parts can, the issue is that they're not integrated with the adult parts, with the going on with normal part of self part. So we call this the apparently normal part. The ANP is the apparently normal part, the part that takes care of the tasks of daily living. Okay, and then the parts fight, flight, freeze, submit, or attach are referred to as emotional parts. And the goal of therapy, and I think in all of these languages, is to integrate, to bring all these parts together so that they function better, so that there's a little bit smoother transition between parts. We're not looking to get rid of parts. Parts are all very important. They all have a positive intention. And also, as we go through that phase 2 work where we heal those memories, the parts are more naturally going to be able to work together because all that stuff's out of the way. Okay? I know it sounds kind of complicated. Please ask questions if you need to. I'm happy to break this down and talk about it some more. But remember, your therapist who's trauma informed is likely going to know one of these languages, and she'll be able to teach you more. Okay, so that's structural dissociation. And then the last language that I've been exposed to and done some training on is internal family systems. Now, I don't know if anybody has seen the movie Inside Out, but it's a delightful movie for children that really does a nice job of demonstrating what internal family systems therapy, or at least the parts in internal family system, are like. So thank you to Janina Fisher, because she also put this in her chart. So I'm trying to find it so I can tell you a little bit more about that. Okay, basically internal family systems talks about the most grown-up part as the self. Okay, the part of us that's curious, compassionate, calm, clear, creative, courageous, confident, and committed. It's probably that part that I would say lives in the optimal arousal zone. Okay, you can see there's a lot of overlap with these languages. So it's easy as you go through your process of healing to learn these different languages and use them in the ways that make sense to you. So basically, internal family systems talks about exiles. And those are the parts of the self that hold disowned feelings, phobias, needs, hopes, and memories. So I bet you're already guessing along with me that this is more the younger parts. These are the child parts, the very young parts. The parts that people don't want to deal with or look at because they're holding all the memories. Okay? Most important part, and also the most precious parts of us. Then there's the managers. These parts suppress the exile's feelings or needs, and they try to carry on with normal life. So there's a lot of energy that goes into suppressing all of these feelings so that you can function. But that's how trauma survivors survive, okay? And then there's the firefighter parts. Parts that play a backup role to absolutely ensure that the exiles remain in hiding or are unnoticed. These might be parts that get you to use and drink and get crazy and do some kind of compulsive behavior to distract. So there's a lot more to internal family systems theory and therapy, but that's basically the language that we use. And again, I find myself using all three of those languages on a regular basis in different ways. And you can see how they overlap. And some of the metaphors that I use are, the main one I use is staying big. I feel like when someone is working towards integration, or even getting to the point where they really are integrated, they're able to stay big most of the time. They're able to react out of the optimal arousal zone. They're able to assert themselves when it's appropriate. They can set boundaries when it's appropriate. They don't feel guilty after setting a boundary or being assertive. And they can just think and react in normal ways. And so I use that term staying big with patients because that's our goal. And it's a good goal. We aren't always going to be able to stay big. But we can stay big even when we're activated. Okay, before we get to the point where it's natural. If we work really hard on our recovery, we can start to stay big. The other metaphor I use a lot is getting little. And I'm not sure if I'm the one that coined that, I doubt it. But getting little is just that time when we get triggered into an emotional flashback. I use the term ding dong, the witch is dead a lot when we're trying to talk to our parts and reassure them that the abuser is no longer around, that the abuser no longer has power. I use the analogy of a concentration camp and use that as a way to talk about what it's like to grow up in a family system where there's chronic levels of abuse and neglect. The war is over is a one I like to use a lot with folks. The war is over. Child parts do not know that the trauma's over. Okay, they are stuck in trauma time, just like Rip Van Winkle. And we have to bring them into the present and re-educate them and help them understand that the war is over. So those are some of my favorites. I'm sure I have more, but those are some of my favorites. Sure hope this video was helpful. A lot of these concepts are tedious to learn about, but so powerful. Loading that information on the hard drive so that we can heal, we can manage these symptoms, and that we can come to a full integration. So if you are a Christian, hang on for a few seconds. I've got a few more things to say. And if that's not something that interests you, that's okay. I'll say goodbye to you for now. If you find these videos helpful, please like and subscribe so that more people can get this information. Thanks. So, okay, for Christians, I think just the additional thing I wanted to say is that I think when you start talking about parts, Christians get a little freaked out. What are you saying? You have people living inside of me? No, I'm not saying you have people living inside of you. I'm saying you have a neural network that has memories, bunches of memories that have been unprocessed. Okay? When we talk about parts, it is a way of thinking about how the psyche is organized and how your brain is organized in a very primitive way to keep you safe. So rest assured, I'm not saying people live inside of you. Okay? So parts are just aspects of ourself. We all have them. Christians who are not traumatized have parts. They have the part of them that comes out when they're playing with their kids. They have the part of them that might come out when they're hanging out with their friends at their class reunion. And then, they have adult parts that take care of business and task-oriented things. And they have mom parts and dad parts and teacher parts and therapist parts. So we all have aspects that we show the world or faces that we show the world. But remember that God did create us and we are made in His image. And Jesus Christ is the express image of the Father, and the Father there's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. So He is a triune being. And I'm not going to get into the Trinity because it blows my mind even. I can't explain it well. But we have a body, soul, and a spirit, just like God. Okay? So, I don't think parts is a foreign concept to God, is all I'm going to say. So hopefully that will calm anybody who's worried about that terminology. And I just want to say, have a blessed week. Please reach out if you have questions or comments, and please share the information with anybody you think it might be helpful to share it with. And I just pray that you all have a wonderful, blessed rest of the week. God bless. Bye-bye.